Ferrari are truly ending the year in terrifying fashion, with Charles and Carlos dominating the past two races. Their post-Monza form has put the Scuderia in firm contention for the Constructors' title, and if they had managed to sort out their form just a couple of races sooner, they may well be challenging for the drivers come the end of the year. For the time being, they've certainly set themselves up for success next year, but their victory at the Mexican Grand Prix didn't exactly come without assistance. The early charge of Lando Norris, which threatened to put the McLaren driver right on the gearbox of the race winner Carlos Sainz, was sabotaged by a spiteful Max Verstappen, which triggered the downfall of Red Bull in a catastrophic fashion. Justice was served, but will Max Verstappen's treacherous driving be capable of ruining Lando Norris's championship hopes? Want to know why Red Bull have self-destructed? Surely it can't just be the thin air that caused them to lose their heads in Mexico City, right? I'm going to end up in the wall in a minute. Is what Lando Norris had to say about Max Verstappen once again displaying some incredibly dangerous habits on track. Not only did Verstappen force Norris off track after initially losing out on his position on lap 11, but proceeded to nearly shunt the McLaren driver when regaining the place. In a trademark showcase of on-track bullying which has been constantly criticized by other drivers, teams and fans for years now, Max earned a 10-second penalty while completely sabotaging Lando Norris's first stint, ruining his tyres and making his ascent up the field, which looked rather likely in the early laps, that much harder. The dirty driving by the Dutchman is something that has been seen time and time again, with it being a near constant danger to whoever his championship rival is at the time, and it cannot be any coincidence as to who he was fighting in such a filthy manner. Verstappen knows his team has failed him in regards to the car, and the moment that someone looks like they can challenge and shorten the gap in any way, regardless of if it's too late in regards to pushing on for the championship or not, Max makes an active decision to force the driver into a crash or yield situation in order to ruin any chance of them making a substantial gain. Norris made his frustrations over the radio clear as he said, "I was ahead the whole way through the corner. This guy is dangerous. It's the same as last time. I'll be in the wall in a minute." And it wasn't just Norris who was perplexed by Verstappen, as Zak Brown was clearly furious about the events of the race, with the McLaren CEO saying it was something that he has witnessed a number of times this year, as Brown called for action after the events in Mexico City. The penalties were probably not enough. I mean, it's getting a bit ridiculous. I applaud the FIA stewards. Enough is enough. Let's just have some good clean racing moving forwards. I think the stewards are on it. I think that's clear by the penalties that were given. The stewards did a good job this weekend. The aforementioned FIA have scheduled an end-of-season meeting in Qatar to discuss racing standards, which seems all too little too late. And the worst part is, following his first penalty, Max wasn't even trying to hide his smugness and disregard for the steward's decision, as his cheerleader cum engineer GP gave him the news about the much-deserved penalty. 10, that's quite impressive. To which GP replied, "There was a lot of whinging, a lot." It was a filthy weekend for Red Bull overall, with Max somehow gaining more penalties than the last half of 2021, as well as his teammates also receiving penalties for a false start and forcing off the superior Racing Point driver, Lance Stroll, which in case you bitter Checo fans can't understand is a joke. It was apparent that Max's mood shifted somewhat after being informed of the second batch of penalties that came his way for leaving the track and gaining an advantage. You could tell that he would somehow try to use his disgusting acts as a way to play the victim due to further penitence being delivered by the stewards, something he has had some right to do in light of his recent FIA dealings, but the Mexican Grand Prix weekend did a lot to undo the positive PR he has gained from his recent victimhood at the hands of the FIA mafia. When talking after the race, Max defended his driving by claiming he was merely doing what he needed to do in order to make up for a slow car, with him claiming that the race was lost to the Ferraris and Norris before the race had even started. The problem is, when you're slower, you're being put into these kinds of positions. I'm not going to give up easily. At the end of the day, it's also not about agreeing or disagreeing with the penalties. The only thing is 20 seconds is quite a lot. But the biggest problem of today, and also what I worry about, is the race pace. It was really not good and is something we need to analyze. Even with those penalties, we had no chance at all to fight at the front. I'm not worried about the title. This was a really bad race for us, but I also know we can do much better than this, so we'll just keep going at it. To be fair, Max is allowed to defend, but his acts went far beyond that. And funnily enough, Horner was equally diplomatic and sheepish in his response when asked about Verstappen's early moves, giving a lot of non-answers and referring to the stewards to make things clearer. And quite frankly, the sheepish and polite responses by everyone at Red Bull points to one thing: they know that they have messed up beyond even attempting to argue that they were in the right this weekend, and perhaps they've messed up their season beyond repair. Much like Verstappen's PR taking a hit, Red Bull's constructors' standings also took a hit for entirely self-inflicted reasons. Hilariously, even after 20 seconds of penalties, Verstappen still came out ahead of his teammate Sergio Perez, who in the race which was meant to resuscitate his season with a helpful dose of home support, managed to exit qualifying in Q1, be made a fool of by Lawson, and failed to do what his fellow front-of-the-grid driver who started at the back did, McLaren's Oscar Piastri, by actually making a meaningful ascent through the field to a respectable position. And yes, Checo had damage, however it was entirely self-inflicted, just like the rest of Red Bull's issues this weekend. As a matter of fact, maybe Checo would have managed to overcome the Goliath challenge of overtaking both Saubers if he wasn't too busy obsessing over the man chasing him for his seat, as he seemed to notice Lawson's late clash with Colapinto immediately. Speaking of Lawson, the Kiwi actually did more for Red Bull than Checo today, as he at least managed to put a challenge in for fastest lap, something which Checo attempted to then take off the RB driver in the most petulant and pathetic move that we have seen in quite some time, a move equivalent to entering a junior golf competition as a fully grown man. Both drivers were ultimately usurped by Charles Leclerc in the Ferrari, but seeing Perez down in last with soft tyres on was certainly not what Red Bull would have wanted from Checo at his home Grand Prix that was meant to fix everything. The fact that Red Bull got demoted to P3 in the Constructors before the season's end wasn't necessarily a surprise, but the manner in which they did certainly was. A collective head loss from the entire team, while also managing to bafflingly attempt to play the hard-done-by victim, was certainly not a befitting way for champions to fall so far. Max did climb back into the points and reach 6th place, and may well still hold on to his championship, but before this weekend, many of us may have lauded him for his hardest-fought championship to date, one which he had to fight against not only his fellow drivers, but the shortcomings of his own team, one which he didn't have the fastest car for the whole season, and one where he didn't have to resort to Brazil 2021 tactics to do so. But any chance of the championship being remembered as the year Max came into maturity and his cleanest fought championship to date has certainly been lost with the antics of the Mexican Grand Prix. Brazil always throws something insane into the mix, but let's just hope it's not a driver going face first into an Interlagos wall as Red Bull and Max Verstappen start to show more and more desperation. I mean, hey, it's not like Max has driven dirty at that track before, right? Well, either way, the fight for the constructors is going to go down to the wire, as both McLaren and Ferrari have drivers capable of fighting at the front, as long as Piastri doesn't repeat the dismal qualifying that he has had at times this season, which has left him vulnerable to Carlos Sainz in the Drivers' Championship. Not only that, but anyone who claims the driver's title is said and done is flat out wrong, as there are 4 races and 2 more sprints to go.